I am Lily, 72 years old, and still learning hard lessons about family. My son Thomas married Amanda 5 years ago, and things have been tense ever since. I never expected my birthday dinner would end in disaster, especially not with my daughter-in-law Amanda telling me to leave. I had been looking forward to celebrating with family at that fancy restaurant downtown. The evening started going downhill when Margaret, Amanda's mother, began making those inappropriate jokes at my expense. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe if family drama resonates with you. Have you ever had to stand your ground with difficult in-laws? Thomas was always my pride and joy. Raising him alone after his father passed away when Thomas was just 12 years old created a special bond between us. We faced every challenge together, from teenage struggles to college applications. I worked 2 jobs to ensure he could attend the architecture program he dreamed of, and watching him graduate with honors made every sacrifice worthwhile. When Thomas called me 6 years ago, excitement bubbling in his voice to tell me he had met someone special, my heart filled with happiness for him. Amanda seemed perfect on paper. A confident marketing executive with a charming smile and impeccable taste. Thomas described their meeting at a charity event where his firm had designed a community center, and she was handling the publicity. According to him, they connected instantly over discussions of sustainable design and community impact. Their romance progressed at lightning speed. Within 6 months, Thomas was showing me engagement ring options and asking for his grandmother's sapphire to incorporate into the design. I remember feeling a flutter of concern at how quickly everything was moving, but I pushed it aside. Thomas had always been thoughtful and deliberate in his decisions. If he felt Amanda was the one, who was I to question his judgment? My first meeting with Amanda's family should have been my warning. We gathered at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with cloth napkins folded into swans and water glasses that never emptied. Amanda's mother, Margaret, dominated the conversation from the moment we sat down. A tall woman with perfectly highlighted hair and jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. Margaret spoke loudly about her country club membership, her husband's successful dental practice, and how Amanda had always been destined for greatness. I noticed how Thomas kept glancing at me throughout dinner, silently checking if I was comfortable. I smiled reassuringly, determined to make a good impression. When Margaret asked about my work, I explained my career as an elementary school librarian with pride, only to see her smile tighten. "How quaint," she said, turning to her husband. "Paul, remember when we considered putting Amanda in public school for about 5 minutes? Thank goodness we came to our senses." I felt the first sting but brushed it off. Everyone has different values, I told myself. This was about Thomas and Amanda, not about comparing family backgrounds. There were other warning signs in those early days that I deliberately ignored. The way Amanda would subtly correct Thomas's table manners in my presence. How she always seemed to have a more refined way of doing things than what I had taught him. The occasional comments about my cozy little house that felt less like compliments and more like gentle condescension. The wedding planning became my first real challenge with Amanda. I had dreamed of helping plan my only child's wedding, but Amanda and Margaret had already selected everything from venue to menu before I was even consulted. When I offered to make Thomas's favorite lemon cake as one of the dessert options, Amanda smiled tightly. "We've already hired a premium patisserie, Lily, but thanks for offering. Perhaps you could help with the rehearsal dinner instead." Even the rehearsal dinner venue had been selected at Margaret's club naturally. My role was reduced to writing checks and smiling in photos. My best friend Eleanor witnessed my struggling attempts to connect with Amanda. Over coffee in my kitchen a week after the wedding, she placed her hand over mine. "Lily, honey, you're trying so hard that you're not seeing what's happening. They're pushing you out." "They're just excited newlyweds," I defended, stirring my coffee a little too vigorously. "They need time to establish themselves as a couple." Eleanor raised her eyebrows but said nothing more. She had known me for 40 years and recognized my stubborn optimism. Despite the challenges, I truly believed things would improve after the honeymoon period. Thomas had always valued family, and surely once the excitement of new marriage settled, we would find our rhythm as an extended family. I held on to that hope like a talisman, polishing it with each dismissed concern and overlooked slight. The first real blow came 3 months after the wedding, when Thomas called to share their exciting news. They had found their dream home and were in the process of buying it. My happiness for them quickly dimmed when he mentioned the location, a prestigious neighborhood near Margaret's home, nearly an hour from my modest suburban house. "It just makes sense," Mom Thomas explained over the phone. "Amanda's office is on that side of town, and the school district is excellent for when we have kids." I swallowed my disappointment. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm happy for you both." What I didn't say was how I had imagined them settling somewhere midway between our homes, how I had pictured Sunday dinners and impromptu visits, the future grandchildren running through my backyard. Instead, I would now need to plan visits like expeditions, navigating crosstown traffic, and coordinating schedules well in advance. This coincided with my retirement after 35 years as an elementary school librarian. I had imagined this new chapter of my life would include more time with Thomas, perhaps helping the newlyweds settle into their home-sharing recipes and traditions. Instead, I found myself with empty days stretching before me and a son who seemed increasingly difficult to reach. The first dinner invitation I extended to them in their new home was met with enthusiasm that quickly evaporated. Thomas called the day before, regret in his voice. "Sorry, Mom. Amanda just remembered they have a dinner with her firm's partners tomorrow. Can we reschedule?" We did reschedule 3 times before a dinner finally materialized 6 weeks later. When they arrived, Amanda immediately commented on my home's dated decor. "Have you ever thought about updating your kitchen lily quartz countertops? Would brighten this space tremendously. Those laminate ones are so retro." Throughout the evening, I noticed how Thomas deferred to Amanda on every topic from politics to the wine selection. When I mentioned a funny story from his childhood, Amanda cut in before he could respond. "Thomas doesn't really enjoy those old stories, do you, honey? We're more focused on creating new memories now." Thomas nodded, avoiding my eyes, and I felt something shift between us, a widening gap I didn't know how to bridge. The pattern continued over the following months. Invitations declined phone calls that went to voicemail, brief texts, instead of our usual long conversations. When we did connect, Thomas seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone or finding reasons to cut our visits short. Amanda's criticisms became more frequent and less subtle. My cooking was too heavy, my fashion sense outdated, my opinions quaint. She would deliver these assessments with a smile, often patting my hand as though I were a child needing guidance rather than her mother-in-law. My sister Barbara noticed the change in me during our monthly lunch. Always more direct than I was, she put down her fork and fixed me with a stern look. "You look miserable, Lily. What exactly is going on with Thomas and that wife of his?" I tried to minimize the situation, but Barbara had always been able to see through my brave faces. "Stand up for yourself, for heaven's sake," she insisted. "You raised that boy alone, put him through college, supported every dream he ever had. You deserve basic respect from him and his wife." I knew she was right, but confrontation had never been my strong suit. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed rough waters and found compromise. The thought of creating conflict with my only child terrified me more than enduring Amanda's subtle cruelties. As my 72nd birthday approached, I dared to hope for a special celebration. I had been dropping hints to Thomas about a new restaurant downtown that had received rave reviews for its farm-to-table cuisine. My birthday fell on a Saturday that year, perfect for a family gathering. When Thomas finally called to discuss birthday plans, his voice held a note of tension I immediately recognized. "Amanda thought we could take you to Riverstone for dinner," he said, naming the upscale restaurant. "Would Saturday at 7 work?" My heart lifted. "That sounds lovely. I've been wanting to try their seasonal menu." "Great." I could hear his relief. "Amanda's mother will join us too. Is that okay?" My enthusiasm dimmed considerably. Margaret had never shown any interest in spending time with me outside of obligatory family events. Her presence would change the entire dynamic of my birthday celebration. "Oh," I said, trying to keep disappointment from my voice. "That's nice of her to want to come." Amanda thought it would be good for all of us to spend more time together as family, Thomas explained, though I suspected the idea had originated with Margaret rather than Amanda. I agreed to the arrangement, telling myself that an evening with Margaret was a small price to pay for time with my son. Besides, perhaps this was a genuine attempt at building bridges between our families. In the week leading up to my birthday, I splurged on a new dress, a lovely deep blue that Eleanor assured me brought out my eyes. I scheduled an appointment at the salon for a trim and style, something I rarely indulged in. I wanted to look my best to show Thomas that his mother could fit into their upscale world, that I could hold my own alongside Margaret's designer outfits and perfectly manicured appearance. The night before my birthday, I lay awake rehearsing pleasant conversation topics and reminding myself to remain positive no matter what underhanded comments might come my way. This dinner was about celebrating with my son, I told myself. Everything else was secondary. Riverstone Restaurant gleamed with understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with gentle piano music. I arrived 10 minutes early, nervous energy propelling me through the heavy glass doors. The maître d' led me to our reserved table, a prime spot near the windows overlooking the river. Thomas and Amanda arrived exactly on time. My son gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and handed me a small gift bag. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his smile genuine if a bit strained. Amanda air-kissed near both my cheeks, her perfume cloud enveloping me momentarily. "That color is actually quite flattering on you, Lily. It hides the neck area nicely." Before I could respond to the backhanded compliment, Margaret swept in, commanding attention in a striking red dress and gold jewelry that caught the light with every movement. "Sorry I'm not late," she announced, as though we should be impressed by her punctuality. She air-kissed. Amanda shook Thomas's hand and gave me a quick nod. "Lily, happy birthday. Another year wiser, one hopes." As we settled into our seats, Margaret immediately commandeered the conversation, updating Amanda on country club gossip, while Thomas studied the wine list with excessive concentration. I sat quietly trying to catch my son's eye, hoping for some acknowledgement that this was in fact my birthday dinner. The waiter arrived to take our orders, and Thomas finally looked up. "Mom, what would you like? It's your special day." Before I could answer, Margaret interjected. "The salmon here is divine, though perhaps Lily would prefer something softer. How are those dentures holding up, dear?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "My teeth are all my own. Margaret, thank you for your concern." "Oh, good genes then. Though I notice they're not quite as white as they could be. I can recommend Paul's whitening system." Amanda laughed, as though her mother had said something charming rather than insulting. Thomas frowned slightly but said nothing. I ordered the duck confit, determined to enjoy at least the food, if not the company. As we waited for our first course, I tried steering the conversation toward neutral territory. "Thomas, how is the community center project coming along? You mentioned the foundation work was nearly complete." Thomas brightened, always enthusiastic about his architectural work, but before he could elaborate, Margaret cut in. "Speaking of foundations, Amanda tells me you're still in that same little house you raised Thomas in. Sentiment is one thing, but at your age, wouldn't a retirement community make more sense? Something with medical staff on call." "My health is excellent," I replied evenly, "and I love my garden and neighbors." "Well, not all of us can afford to upgrade, I suppose," Margaret said, with faux sympathy, ignoring the fact that I had chosen to stay in my comfortable home. Though with no mortgage at this point, one wonders where all that teacher pension goes. "Librarian," I corrected gently, "and my finances are quite stable, thank you." The appetizers arrived momentarily, halting Margaret's inappropriate comments. I took the opportunity to admire the beautiful presentation of my roasted beet salad, determined to find moments of pleasure despite the tension. Margaret was not deterred for long. As she delicately cut into her foie gras, she launched into a story about her recent Mediterranean cruise, emphasizing the exclusive nature of the ship and their first-class flights. "You really should travel more, Lily," she concluded. "Though I suppose solo travel for women your age can be intimidating. All those stairs and different currencies." Mom has traveled quite a bit. Thomas interjected, finally defending me. She and Dad backpacked through Europe before I was born, and she took me to the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone after he died. Camping. Margaret said the word as though it tasted unpleasant. How? Rustic. I meant proper travel with 5-star accommodations and cultural experiences. Amanda nodded in agreement. Travel is wasted without luxury, honestly. Why go somewhere just to be uncomfortable? I thought of the stars above our tent, in Yellowstone. Thomas's wonder at seeing Old Faithful erupt for the first time, the connection to nature and each other we had felt. Those memories were priceless, regardless of star ratings or thread counts. When our main courses arrived, I hoped the excellent food might improve the atmosphere. The duck confit was perfectly prepared, the meat tender and flavorful. I complimented the chef's skill, trying once more to steer toward pleasant conversation. Speaking of cooking, Amanda said, Margaret is hosting Thanksgiving this year. We thought we should let you know early so you can make other plans. The statement struck me like a physical blow. Thanksgiving had always been at my house. Even after the wedding, I had hosted the holiday, preparing Thomas's favorite dishes alongside new recipes to accommodate Amanda's preferences. I managed, putting down my fork. I had assumed we would continue our tradition. Thomas at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Amanda thought it might be nice to rotate holidays, give you a break from all the cooking. And my dining room actually fits a proper table, Margaret added. 12 people comfortably with Lenox china and real silver. So much nicer than plastic folding tables, don't you think? The reference to the card table I had set up one Thanksgiving when we had unexpected guests was deliberately cutting. I had polished my mother's silver and used my best china, making the extended table as beautiful as the main one. The gift-giving moment came after the main course was cleared. Thomas pushed the small gift bag toward me, looking oddly apologetic. We weren't sure what you needed, so. He trailed off as I opened the bag to find a gift card for a department store. The amount was generous, but the impersonal nature of the gift, after 48 years of being his mother, stung deeply. Thank you, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. This will be lovely for choosing something special. Margaret immediately produced an elegantly wrapped box with an enormous bow. This is just a little something from me. I saw it and thought of you. Inside was an expensive anti-aging skincare, set from a luxury brand. The card read, "Never too late to try." The implication that I needed significant improvement at 72 was impossible to miss. How thoughtful, I said, closing the box quickly. As dessert menus were presented, Margaret's jokes escalated from merely inappropriate to deliberately cruel. She commented on my weight, suggesting I skip dessert while ordering the chocolate soufflé for herself. She referred to me as single and not looking, obviously to our waiter following, with a wink that made the young man visibly uncomfortable. She made a pointed reference to how some women just give up after widowhood while eyeing my practical low-heeled shoes. Throughout this increasing hostility, Thomas became increasingly engrossed in his phone, checking emails with a concentration that seemed designed to avoid witnessing his mother-in-law's behavior. Amanda laughed at each cutting remark occasionally, adding supportive comments that enhanced her mother's cruelty. I maintained my composure through tremendous effort, reminding myself that creating a scene would only reinforce whatever narrative Amanda and Margaret had constructed about me being difficult or oversensitive. I declined dessert not because of Margaret's comment, but because the knot in my stomach had grown too tight for anything sweet. Then Margaret crossed a line I could not ignore. As coffee was served, she launched into a story about a friend's recent wedding. The groom's father gave such a moving toast, everyone was in tears. So much more meaningful than when the mother tries to speak. Reminds me of your poor late husband, Lily. What was his name again, Tim? David, I said quietly, my hands shaking slightly as I set down my coffee cup. His name was David. Right, David, Margaret continued undeterred. Anyway, as I was saying to Amanda, it was probably a blessing he checked out early. Men of that generation simply cannot handle independent women. He would have been completely intimidated by Amanda, don't you think? Probably for the best he never had to feel so inadequate. The casual cruelty of dismissing my husband's death from cancer as checking out early, and the suggestion that David, one of the most supportive men I had ever known, would have been intimidated by Amanda's supposed superiority, broke something inside me. The grief I had carried for 20 years, carefully tended and respected, was being used as ammunition for a joke. "I would appreciate it if you didn't speak about my late husband that way," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the emotion churning inside me. "His name was David. He was a wonderful father to Thomas, and I would ask you to respect his memory." The table fell silent. Thomas finally looked up from his phone, surprise evident on his face. Amanda's expression hardened, clearly unprepared for me to actually object to any treatment, no matter how disrespectful. It was Amanda who broke the silence, her voice cold and dismissive. "If you don't like my mother's jokes, just pay the bill and leave." The restaurant seemed to go silent around us, though logically I knew other diners continued their conversations, unaware of our table's tension. Thomas stared at his wife, seemingly shocked by her bluntness, while Margaret's lips curved into a satisfied smile. I looked at Amanda, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, and saw the meanness behind the polished exterior. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The constant accommodation the swallowed hurts the excuses I made for increasingly poor treatment. All of it crystallized into a sudden clarity. "Thanks for the tip," I replied, my voice calm and even. I reached for my purse and removed my wallet. With deliberate movements, I calculated my portion of the meal, including tax and a generous tip for our server, who had been navigating our uncomfortable dynamics with grace. I counted out the bills and placed them neatly beside my plate. "What are you doing?" Amanda asked, her confident expression faltering slightly. "Following your suggestion," I answered, closing my wallet and returning it to my purse. "I am paying for my meal and leaving." Mom, Thomas finally found his voice. "Amanda didn't mean it literally. Don't be so sensitive." The dismissal in his tone, so similar to Amanda's, cut deep. My own son, the little boy I had comforted through nightmares and supported through challenges, was treating me with the same casual disregard as his wife. "I believe she did mean it literally, Thomas. And I am choosing to respect her wishes." Margaret's smug expression was beginning to shift as she realized I was actually leaving. "Oh, Lily, don't be dramatic. It was just a bit of harmless teasing." I stood up, smoothing my new blue dress, and picked up my purse. Cruelty disguised as jokes is still cruelty, Margaret. Thank you for joining my birthday celebration. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. With a dignity I was surprised to find within myself, I walked away from the table. I could feel their eyes on my back as I moved through the restaurant toward the exit. The maitre d' nodded politely as I passed, and the cool evening air felt like a blessing against my flushed face when I stepped outside. I had made it halfway across the parking lot when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. "Mom, wait!" Thomas called, his voice echoing in the nearly empty lot. I turned to face my son, noting his flustered expression and the way he ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. "You can't just walk out like that," he said, sounding both angry and confused. "It's embarrassing." "More embarrassing than watching your wife and her mother mock your mother on her birthday?" I asked quietly. "They weren't mocking you," he insisted, though his eyes slid away from mine. "That's just Margaret's sense of humor. You're being too sensitive." "Thomas," I said suddenly, feeling very tired, "your wife just told me to leave a restaurant on my birthday dinner because I asked for basic respect regarding your father. In what world is that acceptable?" "You don't understand how difficult this is for me," he said, his voice lowering. "I'm caught in the middle here." "There shouldn't be a middle when it comes to treating your mother with basic kindness," I replied. "I have tried, Thomas. I have accommodated Amanda's preferences, accepted being sidelined at your wedding, tolerated Margaret's constant put-downs. I have made every effort to support your marriage while maintaining my self-respect. Tonight crossed a line." "So what, you're giving me an ultimatum?" Anger flashed across his face. "Choosing between you and my wife?" "No, Thomas. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing not to spend my birthday being insulted and belittled. I deserve better than that, even if you can't see it right now." His expression hardened. Amanda was right. You are making this all about you. The irony of that statement on my own birthday might have made me laugh under different circumstances. Instead, I simply shook my head. Good night, Thomas. I love you. When you're ready to talk with respect, my door is always open. I turned and continued to my car, tears blurring my vision as I fumbled with my keys. I did not look back to see if Thomas was still standing there or if he had returned to the restaurant. The tears came in earnest as I drove home, grief and relief battling within me. I had stood up for myself finally, but at what cost? My house was dark and quiet when I arrived. I moved through the familiar rooms without turning on lights, the moonlight through windows sufficient to guide me. I changed out of my new dress, hanging it carefully, though I wondered if I would ever want to wear it again. In my comfortable pajamas, I sat on the edge of my bed and finally allowed myself to fully feel the events of the evening. The phone rang at nearly midnight, startling me from my thoughts. Eleanor's name appeared on the caller ID. Lily, I know it's late, but I wanted to check how your birthday dinner went. Her familiar voice broke the dam, and I found myself pouring out the entire evening, from Margaret's cutting comments to Amanda's dismissal to Thomas's angry reaction in the parking lot. Oh, honey, Eleanor said when I had finished. I am so proud of you for walking out. It's about time. I might have lost my son, I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. You haven't lost him, Eleanor assured me. You've given him a chance to find his way back to being the man you raised him to be. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one right now. We talked until my tears subsided, Eleanor's steady support reminding me that I was not as alone as I felt. Before we hung up, she made me promise to come to her house for lunch the next day. No one should eat birthday cake alone, she insisted, and I baked your favorite lemon cake this afternoon. 72 candles might be a fire hazard, but I think we can manage a symbolic few. I smiled for the first time since leaving the restaurant. I'll be there. Thank you, Eleanor. As I finally lay down to sleep, I realized that standing up for myself, while painful, had been its own kind of gift. For the first time in years, I had honored my own worth instead of accepting whatever scraps of respect others deemed to give me. The path forward was uncertain, but at least it would be one I walked with dignity. The days following my birthday unfolded in a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. My phone remained stubbornly silent, no calls or texts from Thomas. I checked it obsessively at first, hoping each hour might bring some recognition from my son that what had happened was wrong. By the third day, I forced myself to put the phone in a drawer and leave it there, the constant checking only feeding my anxiety. Eleanor was my lifeline during those first difficult days. She brought over groceries when I couldn't face the prospect of running into acquaintances who might ask about my birthday. She sat with me through tearful afternoons and reminded me to eat when food was the furthest thing from my mind. Have you looked at social media? She asked hesitantly on the fourth day of silence. I shook my head. I maintained a Facebook account primarily to see photos of friends' grandchildren, but rarely posted myself. Eleanor grimaced. Amanda has been posting. You might want to prepare yourself. With reluctance, I logged into my account, while Eleanor sat beside me on the sofa. Amanda had indeed been posting, constructing a narrative that painted me as an unreasonable, jealous mother-in-law who had thrown a tantrum during a lovely family dinner her mother had graciously attended. There were sympathetic comments from her friends, most of whom had never met me, expressing shock at my unhinged behavior and offering support to Amanda for dealing with a toxic mother-in-law. This is absurd, I whispered, staring at the screen. She makes it sound like I flipped the table and stormed out screaming. People who post things like this count on the other person being too dignified to correct the record publicly. Eleanor said, her voice tight with anger. It's manipulative and cowardly. I closed the laptop, suddenly exhausted. I won't play that game. Anyone who knows me would never believe this version of events anyway. My sister Barbara called that evening her characteristic directness a strange comfort after days of walking on eggshells. I saw Amanda's ridiculous posts, she said without preamble when I answered. That girl is a piece of work. Are you holding up okay? I gave her the full account of what had happened, including Thomas's reaction in the parking lot. Good for you for walking out, Barbara said firmly. It's about time you stood up to those two. Thomas needs to grow a spine. I keep wondering if I overreacted, I admitted, giving voice to the doubt that had been nagging at me. Maybe I should have just ignored it, kept the peace. At what cost, Lily? Your self-respect, your dignity. You've been keeping the peace for years while they've been treating you like an inconvenience rather than family. There's a difference between compromise and doormat, and you finally recognized it. Barbara's unwavering support bolstered my resolve, though the silence from Thomas continued to ache like a physical wound. I found myself wandering through the house at night, looking at photographs from when he was a boy, wondering how we had arrived at this painful impasse. A week after the restaurant incident, the doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. Through the window, I could see Thomas standing on my porch alone, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. My heart leapt, then immediately began racing with anxiety. I opened the door but didn't immediately invite him in. "Hello, Thomas." "Hey, Mom," he shifted uncomfortably. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, allowing him into the house where he had grown up. We moved to the living room, an awkward tension between us that had never existed before. "How are you?" he asked, perching on the edge of the sofa. "I've been better," I answered honestly. "It was not how I expected to spend my birthday." He sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Look, I think things got out of hand. Everyone was just trying to have a nice evening." The minimization of what had happened immediately put me on guard. "Is that how you remember it, Thomas? A nice evening where your mother-in-law insulted me repeatedly and your wife told me to leave?" "Margaret doesn't mean anything by her comments," he said, the rehearsed quality of his words suggesting this was Amanda's perspective, not his own. "That's just how she talks to everyone." "That's not true and you know it," I replied quietly. "She doesn't speak to Amanda that way, or to you, only to me." Thomas looked away, unable to deny this obvious fact. "Things have been tense at home since that night," he admitted after a moment. "Amanda thinks you're trying to come between us. By expecting basic respect. By walking out of her mother's birthday dinner." "It was my birthday dinner, Thomas." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "You know what I mean." I studied my son, really seeing him perhaps for the first time in years. The dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed to choose each word with excessive care, as though walking through a minefield. "Thomas, are you happy?" I asked gently. The question seemed to startle him. "What? Of course I am. I have a beautiful wife, a successful career, a nice home." "That's not what I asked. Are you happy?" His eyes met mine briefly before sliding away. "Marriage requires compromise, Mom." "Compromise, yes. Submission, no. There's a difference." He stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. "You don't understand how difficult Amanda's childhood was. Her father was very critical, and she needs extra reassurance. Margaret is protective because of what they went through. That explains their behavior, Thomas. It doesn't excuse it." "What do you want from me?" Frustration edged his voice. "Amanda is my wife. For the sake of my marriage, I need you to apologize for walking out." I felt a profound sadness settle over me. "I will apologize for leaving abruptly if Amanda and Margaret apologize for their treatment of me. That seems like a fair compromise, doesn't it?" Thomas's expression hardened. "So you won't apologize unless they do first? That's childish, Mom." "No, Thomas. That's self-respect." I kept my voice gentle despite the pain in my heart. "I have apologized many times over the years for things that weren't my fault, all to keep the peace. This time I can't do that. It would be dishonest, and it would tell Amanda and Margaret that their behavior was acceptable." "So you're choosing your pride over a relationship with your son?" The accusation hung in the air between us. "I will always want a relationship with you, Thomas. But it needs to be one based on mutual respect. I deserve that much." He shook his head, moving toward the door. "Amanda was right. You're being selfish and unreasonable." The door closed behind him with a finality that broke my heart. I sat in the quiet house wondering if I had just lost my only child over my refusal to accept disrespect. The doubt crept in again, whispering that perhaps peace at any price would have been better than this painful estrangement. In the following days, news of the rift spread through our small community. Neighbors who had known Thomas since childhood stopped by with casseroles and concerned expressions. My book club friends offered solidarity and distractions. Even the young couple next door, who I had barely spoken to beyond neighborly greetings, brought over homemade cookies and an offer to help with yard work anytime you need it. The support was touching, but also embarrassing. I had never wanted my personal struggles to become public knowledge, had always valued privacy and dignity. Now I felt exposed my family troubles, an object of community speculation and pity. Eleanor suggested that getting out of the house might help break the cycle of rumination I had fallen into. "You can't sit here waiting for Thomas to come around," she said firmly. "You need to reconnect with the world. Remember who you are outside of being his mother." Though it took significant encouragement, I finally agreed to accompany her to a community art class at the local cultural center. The first session was awkward, my concentration shattered by intrusive thoughts about Thomas and Amanda, but by the third week, I found myself genuinely absorbed in learning watercolor techniques. The focus required to blend colors and create light and shadow provided a respite from grief, if only for a few hours. The art class became an unexpected sanctuary. Twice weekly, I sat at a long table with 7 other students, most of them retirees like myself, learning to translate what I saw onto paper. Our instructor, a serene woman named Laura, emphasized process over perfection, encouraging us to embrace the unpredictable nature of watercolors. "The painting will tell you what it wants to be," she often said. "Your job is to listen and respond." I found wisdom in her artistic philosophy that extended beyond the canvas. My life, too, was revealing what it wanted to be in this new chapter, if only I could listen with an open heart. It was during the 4th class that I met Grace, a woman about my age with silver hair and laugh lines around bright blue eyes. She struggled with the same watercolor techniques I did, and our shared frustration formed an immediate bond. "I never thought painting would involve so much waiting," she commented, as we cleaned our brushes after class. "Wait for this layer to dry. Wait for the paper to absorb water. Wait. "Like life," I replied without thinking. "So much waiting for the right moment." She studied me with unexpected perception. "You sound like someone who's done quite a bit of waiting recently." Something in her kind expression invited confidence. Over coffee after class, I found myself sharing a condensed version of the birthday dinner disaster and the subsequent silence from Thomas. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 3 years," Grace revealed after I finished. "My son-in-law convinced her I was trying to undermine their marriage because I suggested they get premarital counseling. 3 years, I couldn't imagine such an extended estrangement. How did you survive it?" Grace's smile held both sadness and strength. "One day at a time. I built a life that wasn't centered around waiting for her to come back. I traveled, made new friends, volunteered. I kept the door open but didn't sit staring at it, if that makes sense." Her words stayed with me, prompting me to examine how much of my identity had become wrapped up in being Thomas's mother, in being available whenever he might need or want me. With his absence, I had been floundering, unsure who I was without that role at the center of my life. Inspired by Grace's example, I began to expand my world beyond the art class. I inquired about volunteer opportunities at my old workplace, the elementary school library, and was welcomed warmly by the new librarian, a young woman named Jasmine, who valued my experience with reluctant readers. Twice weekly, I now read to kindergarten classes. The children's enthusiasm for stories, reminding me why I had loved my career so deeply. Their uncomplicated affection, expressed in crayon drawings and spontaneous hugs, began healing something broken inside me. Eleanor and Barbara remained steadfast supports, but I was building new connections too. Grace introduced me to her walking group, 4 women who met at the park 3 mornings a week to walk the perimeter trail and discuss everything from politics to grandchildren to the novels they were reading. For the first time in decades, I was making friends based solely on shared interests rather than through connections to Thomas or my late husband. The revelation was both liberating and somewhat sad, highlighting how narrowly I had constructed my life around family roles. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner incident, Eleanor and Barbara proposed a weekend getaway to a coastal bed and breakfast 3 hours from town. My initial instinct was to decline. worried that Thomas might try to contact me while I was away. That's what voicemail is for, Barbara said practically. And he knows where you live. He's not going to forget between Friday and Sunday. Recognizing the truth in her words, I agreed to the trip. The 3 days away from home were restorative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Walking the beach at sunrise, sharing bottles of wine and long conversations by the fireplace, browsing quirky coastal shops without any particular agenda, I felt layers of tension melting away. "You look different," Eleanor commented as we drove home Sunday afternoon. "More like yourself." "I feel different," I admitted. "Less like I'm waiting for something to change and more like I'm actually living." The universe has a way of testing new resolutions. The very next morning after our return, I stopped at my favorite local cafe for coffee and encountered Margaret sitting alone at a corner table with her own cappuccino. My first impulse was to leave, immediately avoiding the confrontation. But something in me, perhaps strengthened by the weekend away or the slow rebuilding of my confidence, refused to be driven from a place I enjoyed. I ordered my coffee and, to my own surprise, walked directly to Margaret's table. "Good morning, Margaret," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "May I join you for a moment?" She looked up, clearly startled to see me standing there. After a brief hesitation, she nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. An awkward silence settled between us as I sat down. Margaret looked different, somehow less formidable than I remembered. There was a tiredness around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. "How have you been?" I finally asked, unsure how to navigate this unexpected encounter. "Fine," she replied automatically, then sighed. "Actually not fine. Things have been difficult." I waited, not filling the silence with nervous chatter as I might have done before. "Amanda has been unusually stressed," Margaret continued, surprising me with this confidence. "She and Thomas have been arguing frequently. She says it's because of you, but—" She trailed off, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. But I prompted gently. "But I've noticed a pattern," she admitted reluctantly. "When things don't go her way, Amanda needs someone to blame. It used to be her father. Now it's often you. Sometimes it's me, though she'd never admit that publicly." The admission hung between us, Margaret looking almost embarrassed to have revealed this family dynamic. "I'm sorry to hear they're struggling," I said sincerely. "Despite everything, I only want Thomas to be happy." Margaret studied me with new consideration. "You know, Lily, I may have misjudged you over the years. Amanda always described you as manipulative and controlling, but that hasn't been my observation." The irony of Amanda projecting her own traits onto me was not lost on either of us, though we left it unspoken. "I worry about Thomas," Margaret continued, surprising me further. "He seems diminished somehow. Not the confident young man who first started dating my daughter." It was the first genuine concern for my son I had ever heard from Margaret, and it touched a maternal worry I had been carrying since seeing the tension in Thomas during his visit. "I've noticed that too," I admitted. "But I don't know how to help without overstepping." "Neither do I," Margaret said. And in that moment, we found an unexpected common ground in our concern for the younger generation. Our conversation didn't solve anything, but as we parted ways 20 minutes later, something had shifted. Not friendship, certainly, but perhaps the beginning of mutual respect, based on shared concern rather than competition. That evening, my phone rang with Thomas's number. My heart raced as I answered, unsure what to expect. "Mom," his voice sounded strained. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Of course," I said, sitting down on the sofa. "I always have time for you." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Things aren't good, Mom. Amanda and I have been fighting constantly. She's angry all the time, and nothing I do seems right." I bit back the impulse to say I told you so or to immediately suggest separation. Instead, I simply listened as Thomas poured out his frustrations and confusion. He described arguments over finances, with Amanda spending far beyond their means despite his concerns. He mentioned her constant criticism of his friends, his hobbies, even the way he spoke. "Sometimes I don't recognize my life anymore," he admitted, his voice catching. "Or myself." "I'm so sorry you're going through this," I said when he finally fell silent. "It sounds incredibly difficult." "What should I do, Mom? You always knew how to fix things." The childlike faith in his question broke my heart, reminding me of the little boy who believed I could heal any hurt with a bandage and a kiss. "I can't tell you what to do, Thomas," I said gently. "This is your marriage, your life. But I can tell you that you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, just as Amanda does. Marriage should lift both people up, not tear one person down." "She wants to go to counseling," he said after a moment. "Do you think that could help?" "I think a neutral third party could be very beneficial," I replied carefully, avoiding direct criticism of Amanda while still supporting Thomas. "Someone who can help you both communicate better and understand each other's needs." We talked for nearly an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. I was careful to listen more than speak, to ask questions, rather than offer solutions to support without overstepping. When we finally said goodbye, Thomas thanked me for listening. "I've missed talking to you, Mom," he said, vulnerability in his voice. "I'm sorry about your birthday." "We'll have other birthdays," I assured him. "I'm here whenever you need me, Thomas. That hasn't changed." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet house processing the conversation. I felt a complex mix of emotions: concern for my son's unhappiness, cautious hope for our rebuilding relationship, and a new sense of my own strength. I had been able to support Thomas without abandoning my own boundaries, to love him without sacrificing my self-respect. The call marked a turning point, the beginning of a slow, careful reconciliation. Thomas began reaching out more frequently, sometimes just for brief check-ins, other times for longer conversations. He shared updates on the counseling process, which seemed to be revealing deeper issues in the marriage than either he or Amanda had been willing to acknowledge. Meanwhile, my own life continued to expand beyond my role as Thomas's mother. The art classes led to a small exhibition at the community center, where I sold 2 of my watercolors to my immense surprise and delight. My volunteer work at the elementary school expanded to include a weekly book club for 4th graders who loved reading as much as I did. Grace and I became regular coffee companions, sharing our parallel journeys through family estrangement and reconciliation. Her daughter had eventually returned to her life after her divorce, and while their relationship had never regained the closeness of earlier years, they had found a new, more mature connection based on mutual respect. The hardest lesson Grace told me over lattes one rainy afternoon was accepting that I couldn't fix her life or make her choices for her. I had to let her find her own way, even when I could see the pitfalls ahead. "I'm trying to learn that, with Thomas," I admitted. "It goes against every maternal instinct I have." "That never changes," Grace said with a wry smile. "My daughter is 47 and I still want to solve all her problems. The difference is now I wait for her to ask for help instead of rushing in with solutions." As autumn progressed toward winter, I found myself less focused on the past hurts and more engaged with the present moment. The growing circle of friends, the creative outlet of painting, the joy of sharing literature with children, all combined to create a life that felt authentic and satisfying. When Thomas called in early December to tell me that he and Amanda had decided to separate for a trial period, I was able to offer support without feeling either vindicated or responsible. Their marriage was their journey, just as my life was now truly my own. Christmas Eve arrived with a blanket of snow that transformed the neighborhood into a greeting card scene. I had decorated the house modestly, a small tree in the living room window and candles on the mantel. Thomas had mentioned possibly stopping by, but I had kept expectations low, understanding that holidays during separation were complicated territory. Instead, I had invited Eleanor, Barbara, and Grace for an early dinner, planning a quiet celebration with the friends who had supported me through the year's challenges. The menu was simple but special: roast chicken with herbs, scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds, and a chocolate Yule log for dessert. I was arranging a centerpiece of evergreen boughs and red berries when the doorbell rang at 4:30, earlier than I expected my guests. Opening the door, I found Thomas standing on the porch, snowflakes dusting the shoulders of his coat, a small wrapped package in his gloved hands. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his smile tentative but genuine. "Is it okay if I come in for a while? I won't stay long if you have plans." "I have friends coming for dinner, but not until 6, I replied, stepping back to welcome him. "You're always welcome here, Thomas, you know that." He entered the warm house, removing his snow-dusted coat and boots in the entryway. Following me to the kitchen, he commented on the decorations and the delicious smells emanating from the oven. "Can I help with anything?" he offered, rolling up his sleeves. "You could finish this centerpiece if you'd like," I suggested, remembering how he had always enjoyed arranging the Christmas table as a child. As he carefully positioned pine cones and holly berries among the evergreen branches, I studied my son. He looked tired but somehow lighter than when I had last seen him, as though he had set down a heavy burden. "How are you, Thomas?" "Really?" I asked, setting aside the vegetable preparation to give him my full attention. He paused, considering the question. "Honestly, better than I expected. The separation has been clarifying. Living alone these past few weeks has given me space to think about what I really want, who I really am." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I've been in individual counseling, not just the marriage counseling. It's been eye-opening." "In what way?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than leading. "I've been talking a lot about Dad, actually." He adjusted a pine cone in the arrangement, "about how losing him shaped me. The therapist thinks I might have been looking for someone to tell me what to do after he died, to fill that guidance role, and Amanda is certainly comfortable taking charge." The insight was profound, and I wondered if I too had contributed to this dynamic, perhaps being overprotective after David's death, not giving Thomas enough space to make his own mistakes. "That makes sense," I said carefully. "You were only 12 when he died. That's a vulnerable age to lose a parent." "I've also been thinking about that night at the restaurant," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I want to apologize, Mom. Not just for what Amanda said, but for how I reacted. You deserved better from me." "Thomas." "No, please let me say this." He set aside the centerpiece and turned to face me fully. "I watched Amanda and her mother treat you disrespectfully for years, and I said nothing. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, or that you didn't notice, or that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for what's right. I was wrong." The simple, straightforward apology was more healing than I could have imagined. Tears pricked at my eyes as I reached across the kitchen island to squeeze his hand. "Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal to me." When you walked out that night, part of me was horrified, but another part was, I don't know, almost relieved. Like finally someone was acknowledging the elephant in the room. It forced me to see things I'd been ignoring. We moved to the living room, sitting together on the sofa, as the snow continued to fall outside the window. Thomas shared more about his separation from Amanda, how the counseling had revealed patterns of control and emotional manipulation that had gradually isolated him from friends, family, and even his own interests and opinions. "We're filing for divorce after the new year," he said finally. "Amanda doesn't want to try anymore, especially since I've started setting boundaries. Without constant agreement from me, she's lost interest in the marriage." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Divorce is painful even when it's the right choice." "It is painful," he acknowledged. "But also liberating. I feel like I'm rediscovering myself." He smiled slightly. "I've started rock climbing again. Remember how Dad used to take me to the indoor climbing gym? Every Saturday morning," I recalled, smiling at the memory. "You'd come home filthy and exhilarated." "Amanda thought it was too dangerous and a waste of time," Thomas said. "After a while I stopped going. Now I realize how many things I gradually gave up to keep her happy." We talked for nearly an hour, reminiscing about David, discussing Thomas's plans to possibly look for a new home closer to my neighborhood, sharing hopes for the coming year. When he finally stood to leave before my dinner guests arrived, he handed me the small wrapped package he had brought. "It's not much," he said, suddenly shy, "but I wanted you to have it for Christmas." Inside the simple wrapping was a framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. Thomas, age 10, and David standing proudly beside a small snowman in our backyard. Both beaming at the camera, their cheeks red from cold, obvious joy radiating from their expressions. "I found it when I was packing some of my things," Thomas explained. "Thought you might like to have it." "I love it," I whispered, tracing the edge of the frame. "Thank you." At the door, Thomas hugged me tightly, the kind of encompassing embrace we hadn't shared in years. "I'm so sorry for everything, Mom. I promise I'll do better." "We both will," I assured him. "That's what family does. We learn and grow together. After he left, I placed the photograph on the mantel among the Christmas candles, David and young Thomas watching over the room with their frozen smiles. The doorbell rang again shortly after my friends arriving with wine and laughter and stories to share. As we gathered around the table, the centerpiece, Thomas had finished gracing the middle. I felt a profound gratitude for this unconventional family. I had built a tapestry of relationships, both blood and chosen, that provided support, joy, and connection. The new year brought continued healing and growth. Thomas found an apartment just 15 minutes from my house, close enough for casual visits, but with healthy separation. We established a Sunday dinner tradition, sometimes just the two of us, other times, including Eleanor Barbara or his new friends from the climbing gym. 6 months after Christmas, Thomas mentioned he had been spending time with someone new, a science teacher named Julia, who shared his love of the outdoors and climbing. When he finally brought her to Sunday dinner, I was struck by her genuine warmth and the way she encouraged Thomas to share his opinions rather than imposing her own. "I like her," Eleanor declared after meeting Julia at a backyard barbecue. "She looks at Thomas like she's interested in who he is, not who she can make him be." The observation was astute and reassuring. I was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries with Thomas's new relationship, supporting without interfering, interested without imposing. The lessons of the past had not been wasted. I encountered Amanda unexpectedly at the farmer's market that summer. After an initially awkward greeting, we managed a civil conversation about neutral topics. As we prepared to part ways, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Thomas seems happy," she said, a complex mix of emotions in her voice. "Happier than he was with me, I think." Rather than agreeing or disagreeing, I simply said, "I hope you find happiness too, Amanda. Everyone deserves that." She seemed surprised by the response, perhaps expecting bitterness or triumph. With a slight nod, she turned and walked away. I felt no need to prolong the encounter or to harbor resentment. The divorce was finalized and we had all moved forward. More surprisingly, Margaret and I developed a cautious rapport through occasional encounters at community events. She had begun therapy herself, prompted by Amanda's increasingly erratic behavior after the separation. During a chance meeting at a charity auction, she confided that she was examining her own role in shaping Amanda's expectations and relationship patterns. "I wanted her to be strong, not domineering," she admitted over auction catalogs. "Somewhere I confused the two." The honesty was unexpected, but welcome a reminder that growth and change were possible at any age. My own life continued to flourish beyond family relationships. The elementary school offered me a part-time position coordinating their reading enrichment program, a perfect blend of my librarian skills and newfound confidence. My watercolor paintings improved enough that the local art association invited me to participate in their spring exhibition. The walking group expanded to include weekend hikes in nearby state parks, strengthening both my body and my friendships. As another birthday approached, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the humiliation and heartbreak of that restaurant confrontation to the rich, multifaceted life I now enjoyed, the transformation was profound. Standing up for myself had been painful, but necessary, the catalyst for changes that benefited not just me, but Thomas as well. The greatest lesson had been learning that true love, whether for family, friends, or self, requires boundaries. Respect is the foundation upon which meaningful relationships are built, and sometimes the most loving action is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. I had spent decades defining myself primarily as Thomas's mother, David's wife, roles that connected me to others, but sometimes obscured my own identity. Now at 73, I was finally fully embracing being Lily with all my own interests, opinions, strengths, and yes, boundaries. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself meant risking a relationship? I hope my story reminds you that self-respect is never selfish. Sometimes walking away from the table is the first step toward building something better. If this resonated with you, please leave a comment sharing your experience. Like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for listening. and remember that it's never too late to teach others how to treat you with dignity and respect.